Thanks for inviting me. I'm going to talk about a joint paper with Elizabeth Keenan, she's over there, and Gneezy, both from UCSD. And we're going to talk about charity. Why do people don't like paying for overhead aversion? And I'll tell you very little about that. But I'll try to find a way that you can avoid it, that you can get them to pay even when they don't like to pay for the overhead. So what I like about this project is that it represents a conflict that I have in my brain. If you look at my identity as an economist, I understand that we should pay money to cover overhead. Overhead is something important. So by overhead, we mean the stuff that goes to the CEO, the offices, traveling, whatever doesn't go to the end user, to the program that we want. Right? That's what we call overhead. And we know that people base their decision whether to give money to charity based on this overhead. So the higher is the overhead, the less likely you are to get money. That we know, right? But like I said, as an economist, I'm convinced that that's a bad measure. Why? Because I teach MBA students, for example, and if I ask my MBA students, would you like to go and work for a nonprofit for $60,000 a year or for a bank for $200,000 a year? None of them want to work for the charity, right? And there is a whole list of things that you can think about that are really bad at not being able to cover high overhead. I gave this talk in Brussels a few months ago, and I spoke with a woman that she's my age, and she travels twice a month to South Africa. And she travels economy class, which means that when she lands after 20 hours of flight, her back hurts, and she has jet lag much more than if she would have flown business class, which is bad. You want her to be able to land and start working. You want to be able to keep the best people, even if you can get people that are really motivated by wanting to do good in the world, you want to be able to keep them. You don't want them to constantly be looking for something else. So retention of good people is really hard when you don't pay enough. And I'm sure that the people in the room can give me other reasons why you should get more money to people that work for charity. So as an economist, I'm really convinced that we should pay high overhead. So at least we shouldn't care about paying high overhead. We should really care about the impact, how much good the charity is doing. So if I'll give you lots of money, if you'll have good people, hopefully you'll be able to get high impact. You can get good results using this work. And that's what I should care about. I shouldn't care about your salary. I should care about what you actually do with the money. It's very easy to spend money. Everyone can do that. It's much harder to spend the money in an efficient way, in a way that will actually get you the results that you want. Again, I'm convinced that the measure that we should look at is the impact that you have, how efficient you are in what you're doing. No problem with that. But as a human being, as someone with emotions, I'm also having problems with paying lots of money to overhead. So imagine I'm flying from Chicago to San Diego tomorrow, and on my way to economy class, because I'm a cheap professor, I'll see the guy from the charity that I just gave money to flying business. So he will use my money, my donation to fly business while I'm flying economy. Yeah, no, that's not going to work, right? I'm not going to be willing to do that. That's really bad. That's really stupid. Why would I give money to someone to fly or to have a higher salary than I have? I'm not going to do that, right? And in general, I have some emotions, some bad emotions about paying for stuff. I want to pay for the kid education in whatever the place that we're talking about. I don't want to pay for offices, for nice offices. What I like about this is that I have this conflict in my brain. Right? So on the one hand, I understand that you should pay a lot. On the other hand, I don't want to pay a lot. I don't think that it's irrational. I don't think that only the rational, cool decision is the right one. And that the emotional part of it, that I feel bad if I see that someone is using the money, misusing my money, I don't think that that's a mistake by me. So I have this conflict within my brain. That's what I like about it. And we started the project by looking at this kind of conflict that, we understand that we pay a lot, we don't want to pay a lot. We understand, we don't want, we understand, we don't want. We just get a shortcut. Nothing happens, right? Can we find a solution to solve this? Can we find a way to solve this? So one approach could be to try and educate people that paying for overhead is fine. They shouldn't worry about that. We've tried We were not successful yet. It's not an easy task to do. And maybe that's the right way to go, and we are just not talented enough. I'm not convinced that that's the right way to go. Other people are much more convinced than I am. We thought about a different way. We thought about, let's try a different way. Let's have the overhead be covered by someone else. Say that we get a rich donor, a big donor, to give us lots of money to cover the overhead, and see what's the effect on the small donor that, we go to them and tell them, look, the overhead is 50%, but someone else is paying for it. Would that solve the problem? What I like about the solution is that it solves the problem I have in my brain. So economist, you need to pay high overhead. Emotion, I don't want to pay high overhead. A clash now. At least for me, if someone else is paying for the overhead, I don't care if I pass by the guy that flies in business class. I don't care about any of these. It's none of my business. Someone else is paying. They find a fool that is willing to pay for it, to cover it. I'm good. I don't care about it. Right? So the solution at least would work on me, and that's why I like it. And it's not tricking people. It's not trying to manipulate people. It's just really trying to find a way to reconcile this conflict. And that's what we did. So that's what I'm going to show you that we did. We started with the lab experiment that has all the advantages and disadvantages, and then I'll talk about a field experiment. So in the lab, we started by wanting to see that indeed there is an overhead aversion. So we had a few hundred students. I think we had about 100 students per treatment that I'm going to talk about. And they had to make a very simple decision, how to allocate money between this charity and this charity. Not how to allocate, sorry, which charity they want to give money to. So they had to choose whether to give money to Kids Corps or to Charity Water. And Kids Corps in our experiment always had 0 overhead. We told them explicitly that this charity will have no overhead. With Charity Water, we varied the amount of overhead. So we had 0, 5, and 55% overhead. That's between subjects. So over here, there are 3 treatments, each one with about 100 students at UCSD. And here's what we found. For some reason, Charity Water was more likable, so more people chose it when there was no overhead in both cases, about 70%, a bit more, 75%. When the overhead was low, it went down by 5%. When the overhead was 50%, it went down by a lot. So people are averse to paying overhead. Nothing is really new over here. It's not shocking. I would be shocked if it didn't work, right? So people don't like paying for overhead. We needed to show it in an empirical way. We did. That's nice. But now comes our solution. What would happen if we'll tell them someone else is paying for the overhead? So we had 2 more treatments in which the overhead was 5% and 50%, but someone else paid for it. You can think about at least 2 hypotheses over here. One of them is that I just don't like charities with high overhead. If the overhead is 50%, it's a signal that the charity doesn't function well, it's not efficient, maybe they're even corrupt. I don't like them, not willing to pay for it, and the results would be very similar to this. I just don't like charities with high overhead. The alternative hypothesis is something in the form of impact. I really care about my dollar going to the cause, going to the program that we have, to the kid that actually needs it. And if the overhead is paid by someone else, I don't care what's the size. And that would mean a much flatter line. Right? And that's what we found. We found support for this latter thing. We found that when someone else is covering the overhead, people have no aversion to it. They don't care. There is no, this line is statistically, this point is statistically the same as the other one. If someone else is paying for the overhead, fine, no problem. I'm good with it. Okay, so that's a starting to see support for the hypothesis that we have that if someone else is covering the overhead, we're good with it. Lab experiments are really good at isolating stuff, at really doing stuff in a clean way. They also have problems. We're talking about students in our lab that never gave money to charity, probably. We ask them to do something weird. It has all host of weird things that come with it. So the next step was to take it to real donors in the real world. That was done with the real charity. The participant, the 40,000 participants, didn't know that they are taking part in an experiment. So there were people just like all of us who got letters at home. It was a hot list, so those are people who gave to a different charity in the, I think, previous 5 years. So those were people that they knew that there is a higher probability that they will give, and they didn't know that they are part of an experiment. And we had 4 treatments over here, each one with 10,000 participants. The control group got a letter telling them, explaining about the charity, saying that the money is really needed for an education project that they have. Please give us money. A very standard one, and they were asked to choose between $20, $50, and $100. The second group, we told, and everything was true. We didn't use deception, of course. We told them, we already raised $10,000. Please give us money. So this seed, there are people in the audience over here and many others that have done experiments in that, showing that if you tell donors, potential donors, that seed money was given by someone else, they are more likely to give money. You can think about simple, information effect of this. I'm giving $20. I have 5 minutes to look at the charity. The people who give $10,000, they have more time, and they looked at it deeply, and they decided to give it. So that could be an effect, and many other things that could happen, also psychological things. So seed money, we know that it helps. We wanted to compare it to the other solutions. The third treatment was matching. For every dollar that you give up to $10,000, we were able to raise a matching grant. So every dollar that you'll give, you'll get $2. Again, it was shown to work before, and we expected it to work. If you look at the literature, seed and matching work about the same level depending on the experiments. The fourth treatment that we have, that's the new part. Everything is the same, but we told them we already raised money to cover the overhead, so everything that you are going to give is going to the project itself. Nothing is going to be used for overhead. Someone else covered the overhead. Okay? And that's what we found. That's the number of donors. I'll show you the same effect with the amount that they collected. Control, we get about 3% response rate. Seed and match, raise the donation. More people are giving money, not statistically different from each other. But when we cover the overhead, we get a huge effect. To tell you the truth, it's much bigger than I expected. Much bigger effect than I expected. All right? So when you tell the donors, someone else is paying for the overhead, they are much more likely to give money, and they also give much more money. So we see over here that can show you how much money they give. If it's not clear, believe me, they do give more money. Interestingly, by the way, in the seed and match, they give, on average, the same amount of money as they give in the overhead. So it's more on the decision, do I want to give money? I'm more likely to give it in the overhead. Once I decide to give money, I'm giving the same on average as I do in seed and match. And all of them are more than the control. It raises more money. Now, tying it back to where I started, what I really like about this is that it solves my problem, right? My conflict in my brain. And all we did, if you think about it, is just, if you put everything in Excel, in one case the title says seed, in the other case it says overhead. We made no other change. It's just the naming of this column in Excel. Right? There is no substantial change apart from the framing of it. And yet, we got people to give so much more money. And I think that we solved lots of the conflicts that we have with ourselves. The bottom line is that if you can put me in a room with one of the, what was it, Sheikh? What was the name of the Sheikh that we had before? Muhammad, right? If you can put me in the room with him, maybe I can convince him that, look, you can give $5 million to an important charity, to an important cause. That would be amazing. It would really help. But if you really want to do well, you can spend this $5 million on a philanthropic effort. So create some kind of body that will do all the philanthropic effort, such that the money that they will raise will go to the program. Your money will go just for the overhead. You should cover the overhead. If you'll do that, instead of $5 million, you'll get a multiplier effect, and at the end of the day, you'll get $25 million for the cause that you had, instead of $5 million. So if you can sit with the wealthier people and try to convince them that they should actually cover overhead, despite of the fact that it sounds less sexy, it sounds less appealing to them, if you can sit with them, show them these results, show them other results, and convince them, that could be a big thing to do. Right? Because if you talk, most of these people didn't become rich because they were lucky, but because they were some kind of businessmen and women, right? They understand that, what's the meaning of higher return on their investment. They understand that if they can sponsor something like that, maybe they can raise much more. It might not be an easy task, but if you'll be able to do that, I think that would be a much more efficient way of actually using the money. Done?
Very good. Thank you, Uri.
Thank you.
Let's now open it up to any questions that you might have. Please go ahead. I wonder if somebody should come and get the microphone. Tova? Yep. Tova is going to
Hi.
help me.
Yeah, it's really a very interesting work. The only thing I'm wondering is that whether those donors have been told that that money that was given to overhead could have gone to the cause as well. I mean, why, it seems like there is a disconnect here. I mean, is it about the guy must be full to cover the overhead, so I don't care? Or is it like, there is some bounded rationality there that, I mean, have you investigated something like,
So Ed, first of all,
to
about
what extent donors understand that that money could have gone to the overhead, so maybe overhead is still relevant?
So I can tell you what people understood. I can tell you what we did and what were the results. What people understood, that's something that you should come up with. But I already had few screaming matches with people who called it irrational behavior. I refuse to call it irrational behavior or some kind of trick. We are also going to fight after that, Catherine?
I think it's irrational.
Thank you.
That's what people do.
Exactly. And I don't think that it's a mistake. Following your emotions is not a mistake in this case, right? So it's what people understand, I don't know. What people feel, I think that we see what they feel. And I feel better about many things that could be stupid because you just changed the name of the Excel file, but I don't think it's a mistake. I don't think that it's a trick that gets them.
Back here. A comment and a question. As a Jim Rosenberg, as a practitioner, representing the practitioner side of things, we don't really dig the whole charity navigators out there, the guide stars, because they're putting increasing burdens on organizations to jump through hoops and come up with metrics and all these various things that we have time to do, but we'd rather not, rather just raise the dollars. And Dan Plott, of course, has written a lot about the use of overhead and how it's a good thing. Question to you is, if you're not going to find someone to cover the overhead, has your studies looked at anything related to organizations that can claim that they have a really, really low overhead, and what kind of buy-in were they getting from donors who like to hear that versus the idea of no overhead or high overhead?
Right, so Dan Palotta's mission is different. So the starting point is the same, recognizing that people don't like to give to overhead and you should give to overhead. And his mission is to try and educate people. We've tried and we failed. So far we ran many experiments trying to do that with no success. And I'm actually skeptical about the ability to do it because it would feel, you will not convince me at the end of the day, despite of the fact that I understand that you should pay high overhead, you will not convince me that I should pay high overhead. So it's just, I wouldn't call it irrationality, I would call it stupidity that I have. And I don't think that other people are better than me in that respect. We have emotions, we follow the emotions. I understand everything, I don't want to do it. So I don't know if that will work. So trying to make your organization leaner seems to be a bad decision from a business perspective. Right, so I'm not sure that that's the right direction to go. So the lower overhead you take. So I spoke with a charity that I'm working with, and I went to their offices, which are really crappy, and I asked them why, and they said, well, the donors come and see the offices. So the big donors send people, or they come themselves to look at the offices, and if we'll have fancy offices, they will not give us money. That's not the right way to run a business. And I think that we should think about the charity more as a business. So I don't think that making the charity leaner. So if you waste money, sure, you shouldn't. But you shouldn't have the condition. The offices shouldn't be bad. You should have nice offices. Maybe not fancy, but they should be nice and functional, right?
If you're efficient and you feel as though you have a good story to tell, and you're able, and donors either want to affiliate with a winning organization or an organization that needs their help. If they want to affiliate with a winning organization that's successful but has a good story to tell about a low overhead, through your research, are donors willing to embrace that idea and feel good about an organization that has a very low overhead? My
guess is that they would be happy. Donors will be happy to give money to an organization with low overhead. The question is, can you do it, right? Can you really have low overhead and yet be very efficient? If you cannot hire the best people, it's going to be very hard to be efficient, right? You're going to hire less good people, and those less good people are going to be less efficient than the better people. So it's going to be hard to actually achieve, I think. I don't know where I'm not in charge of the mic, so.
So my question is about, I'm sure that you have thought also about kind of a continuation of this research, and so overhead on steroids, say you're taking the overhead, some big rich donor is paying for all of that, and then if you're just adding, say, matching and seed, and then different variations of matchings, you may see significantly more effect.
Could be, I don't know.
And then my last question is, maybe this is kind of from a more theoretical point of view. Supposing that all of the charities are now doing this overhead stuff, they're finding some big donor who is paying all of that stuff, where at the very end are you going to be then seeing the world of charity having kind of gone to?
So I think it's a great question. What would happen if everyone will start using this? Is this just shifting money from other charities to this charity? Or does it increase the pie? Are more people going to be willing to give money? I, of course, don't have data about this, and I'll never have data about it because you cannot run an experiment like this. I can tell you my intuition. My intuition is that you'll get more people. You'll also increase the pie if you'll do that. So you'll get people that currently are not willing to pay for it, for many programs, to be willing to do it if they'll know that it happens. But that's just a guess. I cannot give you any empirical evidence for this because they will never exist. So it's an open question that will always be open. Yes?
So I'm trying to figure out whether or not what's appealing about this is that I don't have to pay for the overhead because it's already covered, or that the fact that you're telling me that some other donor has covered the overhead tells me that some other donor has confidence in the organization. Right. And so do you have any intuition as to which?
So I think that this one I do have. That's why we did seed and match over here. Because seed, it's the same amount of money. If it was just the signal, we know that the value of signal is high. But that should work the same with the seed. I don't see why it should work higher here than here.
But the seed goes presumably to the cause as well as to the, right? So the thing about overhead is that it's a specific kind of investment in the organization.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Which might be considered more of
So basically you're saying maybe someone who really invested effort in this, looked at the way your organization worked, the way the overhead is used, and he or she thought that, well, you're doing a good job. I want to actually do it.
That
could be
like a higher bar.
Right. We don't have any data about this, and this kind of data could be actually achieved, and I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think the other part of that question is if you have upfront money and you dedicate it to any specific goal in the organization, this is one goal, but if you chose something else, goal 3, and then said the exact same thing, that X dollars have been brought in, and those dollars are going to goal 3, now would you like to give more? Is outstanding as well here, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of a corollary of what you're saying.
Right, because there are the implicit judgments, and I'm trying to figure out how important those are. And because it's just as simple as, what if I gave money up front, I gave money initially, and then I let you allocate it, right? And so we decided to put it towards overhead is a different kind of important thing that I'm trying to do.
If anyone is interested in running the experiment, I'll be happy to talk with you after that.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
So I'm interested. It seems like you have a prediction that's very clear. I wanted to ask one question before that, which is, did you tell people how much the overhead was in this study?
No, we did not.
So if you had 2 organizations and you explicitly said they have different amounts of overhead, but in both cases people are told that it's covered, your prediction is they should be equivalent for those.
That's my prediction, but it's an open question. So that's what we did in the experiment, but those are, again, lab students. My guess is that it will hold, but it's an open question that is worth, again, if someone is interested, I'll be happy to talk with you about it, because I think that it is an interesting question. Now, the point with this, with running experiments with your companies is that, probably each one of you were part of something that had some seed money or match money. The question is, can you do better? Right? So these experiments are not just, let's learn something about people, but like the suggestion that you had, can we improve on that? To what point can we push it that, we can use this $10,000 in this case that we have to get a lot more money? And then we can use it in the future also. right? So it's making your attempt, the return on your investment, much higher. The return on the $10,000 is much higher here than here, and that's what you should try and do. And all the suggestions that you raised, those are important things.
Okay, so let's take one more. Okay, I'll take two. I'll take you, and then we're going to have to move on to the second speaker. I apologize.
I'll be brief. Can you share any specific language about how you frame the overhead being covered by donors piece? I think in the charity water cases, I remember it was like, we have 91 donors who have covered the overhead of the organization. Is there any language that you're willing to share about how you explain the overhead being covered?
So it's in the paper. I'll be happy to send you a link to the paper that shows exactly what we are allowed to show. We are not allowed to identify the charity that we are working with. They want to remain anonymous, but the difference that we have is there, and I'll be happy to share it with you.
Okay, so last question.
I'm just wondering, I'd like to try to replicate your study
Good.
with my organization, but what kinds of limits on subjects do you have to inform people later? Do you have to debrief them? I mean, when you run an experiment, normally you have very strict rules about how you handle your subjects.
So I think that that's a great question. First of all, you have to pass your common sense barrier, which most companies, I'm always amazed by the fact that big companies with lots of money make such stupid decisions. So the Facebook experiment, you might have heard about it in the summer. There was this Cupid experiment. Those are really, no one with common sense. My 11-year-old son would tell you that's a bad idea. Don't run this experiment. So first, before you go to legal, before you go to think whether it's going to work or not, think about it for a moment. What will happen if someone will find out that I just did it? Can I defend it as something nice? I think that you can in this case. And if you're not sure about it, don't run the experiment. The damage that you'll do is much higher to your charity and in general to the industry. So if it passes the common, so if you run this experiment and the journalists find out and put it in the front page of the local newspaper or more than that, you can say, that's fine. We're doing this just because we want to see what's the highest return on investment that we have. Now, if you run it yourself, you do not need the consent form, because that's, you're trying different kind of marketing. That's fine. You do not need a consent form. You do not need to inform people after that they were part of an experiment, right? So that's, in that respect, you're fine. If you try to deceive them, for example, which you should never do, your legal team will not allow you, your common sense will not allow you, and then you'll have to inform them. But just don't do it. It's just the wrong thing to do. As long as you're doing stuff that you might have done otherwise, you don't need any of these. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ari.